Hello, this is the tutorial for Monday's homework, which concerned itself with ratios and proportions. I'm going to look at a couple of problems with you here, problem number 1 and problem number 4, and point out some important points that you need to keep in mind as you're doing this. Concerning ratios, of course, we're aware that ratio is just a comparison between two or more quantities that shows the scale between them, okay? And when we write a ratio, there are three different ways to write it. We can write these two numbers with the colon between them. We could use the preposition to, to, or we can write it as a fraction. Now, we usually reserve writing things as a fraction if we're describing something that is a part out of a total amount instead of a part-to-part ratio. Those typically are part-to-whole ratios. Okay. Starting with number 1, it discusses Mary. It talks about how she sold 6 candy bars and she still has 8 candy bars to sell. You might notice that this is a part-to-part ratio because they do not mention how many total there were. In this problem, you know what, that's unimportant, but it is important to know that, you know, there are 14 total candy bars in this situation here. It says, what is the ratio of bars sold to bars needing to be sold? One thing to keep in mind here is that when you write your ratios, I do want you labeling these things. So they want the ratio of sold to needing to be sold. If it helps you, one thing to do is go ahead and write sold, and I'm going to use a colon, to need to sell. And what I've already done was I've labeled these things and then put in blanks for numbers. Here's one typical mistake that people make. Of course, we know that there are 6 that she sold and 8 that she needed to sell. So she has 6 sold to 8 that she needs to sell. This is the ratio that I'm looking for. This is, as a matter of fact, the ratio that we've been asked to write. But here's the number 1 typical mistake. People get these numbers mixed around. And so I have to point out that order matters in a ratio. If I'm asking you for the ratio of sold to needing to be sold, it does have to be in that respective order. If I had asked for what's the ratio of the bars that need to be sold to sold, I would have to switch these numbers around. And some of you might be thinking, well, you know, that's not that much of a deal. But it is a big deal when I'm reading, you know, for a ratio. Usually, you know, in math, we don't label a whole lot of the time. We just write 6 to 8, and we would have to assume that these are the sold and these are the need to be sold. Okay, so you have to be careful. The other thing is this. If you were to leave your answer like this, I'd be very pleased that you got the right answer, but I'd be displeased because you did not reduce the ratio. Now, we have to think about ratios just like we think about fractions, always thinking if you can simplify it, you had better do that. And I do notice that 6 and 8 are both even. So, of course, 2 would go into both. It has to have a common factor of 2. Dividing these both in half, the ratio that's going to earn you the points here would be 3 sold, because that's half of 6, to half of 8 for need to sell. Now, I look at common factors here. I look for common factors, and I notice that the greatest common factor between 3 and 4 is merely 1. So we can't go any lower than this. So we say this is simplest terms or lowest possible terms. So this is the ratio we're looking for. Remember, you need to reduce if you can, and order does matter. Now, peeking ahead at number 4, we did kind of mention fraction notation is writing a ratio in a fraction. But I'll tell you what, just because I say this doesn't mean you can't write part-to-part ratios as a fraction. But you typically don't. You write part-to-whole ratios. So usually when we look at a fraction, we think of the top as being a piece out of a total amount or a whole. Okay, and that's important because as we read number 4, it talks about how Ryan ate 6 pieces of a pizza at a party. You know, this is pertinent information, so I might write this. 6 pieces, 8. That's what he ate, okay? And then it says there were 4 large pizzas cut into 8 pieces each. They want to know what fraction out of the total amount of the pizza did Ryan eat. We need to know 2 things here. What was the total amount and what did he eat? Fortunately, we've already discovered how much he ate. There were 6 pieces eaten. I'm going to label that with pieces. So this 6 is going to go right here. The question is how many total? Now they did give us some information. They didn't come out and say it, but they said there were 4 of these pizzas. We'll draw a diagram of 1. But each one of these pizzas were cut into 8 pieces. So if I have 4 of these with 8 each, we could say there are 32 eighths of a pizza altogether. So we say 32 total pieces. Now I want you to look at this because this is the fraction out of the total amount that Ryan successfully ate. You know, I think that's kind of a lot, but here's what I wanted to point out. These are both even. We need to look for a common factor. 2, of course, would have to be a common factor. One thing we need to think about is are there any greater common factors between 6 and 32? And unfortunately, the factors of 6, and I'm going to pick on 6 because it's the smaller of the two. The factors of 6 are 1, 2, 3, and 6. 6 doesn't go into 32. 3 does not go into 32. Of course, 1 does, but that wouldn't successfully make it smaller. So we have to rely upon 2 here. So splitting these both in half, I would have to see your answer, especially on the DMCT. Okay, but I would have to see your answer, therefore, in the homework, as 3 pieces. We could say out of every 16 total pieces. I know that these two fractions are equal. 2 ways that I can prove this or demonstrate this to show that there was a scale factor. I can multiply these both by 2 to get here, and I can multiply these by a half to get here, or divide them by 2 to get back to this simplest form fraction. And the other way I could determine this is to do a cross product and note that the cross products were equal. Okay? Good luck on the homework.